This video is entitled A Secret to Psychotherapeutic Healing. Now I want to be clear, it's entitled A Secret, not The Secret, because I don't really feel there's one specific ingredient that will transform people. But I found something that unfortunately we don't hear enough about in our interactions with clients, that oftentimes moves those sessions from just being effective to transformational sessions. And what that is that a lot of times we psychotherapists become focused on this idea of eradicating symptoms. Now, I think this is a holdover from using our model from a medical perspective rather than from a healing perspective. The medical model tells us we need to diagnose and then treat to get rid of a certain symptom. And this works very well in medicine. So, for example, someone has something horrible like cancer or heart disease or something. The goal is to eradicate the negative symptoms so that the person then can experience health. Sometimes that's very beneficial in psychotherapy. If somebody comes in with a certain degree of anxiety and there's a way to decrease or eliminate the anxiety, that's very effective. But oftentimes I found, and I'm sure a lot of other therapists have found, that trying to eradicate a symptom inadvertently almost can sometimes strengthen it. And here's what I mean. And I'm going to try to make this very simple because it's kind of complex. It's a little hard for me to articulate. When something happens, we immediately create a distinction about that something. We assign a meaning to it, and then we categorize it. So if we're going through a certain situation in our lives and something that we are perceiving as painful, we naturally want to eliminate that. We don't want to feel pain. Human organisms, and any organism really, wants to move away from pain and move toward pleasure. So what we end up doing is creating this dichotomy to where the symptom is on one side and the opposite, not symptom, is on the other side. Now, this sounds pretty logical when we look at this through an Aristotelian logic of it's either this or that, a kind of a dichotomy. So if we were to put it in a formula, we'd say the problem was A, and the opposite of the problem, not the problem, is not A. So A/not A. Now this is pretty clear. All right, you're either this or you're that. But sometimes we can't get rid of A completely, because sometimes A is a part of us. And it's like we're trying to banish ourselves, parts of aspects of ourselves that we don't like. And in the process of doing that, we inadvertently continue to feed that. So if someone comes in and says, I have a problem, A, they already have been trying to do not A, either more or less of A, to do something to try and eradicate A. But if that part of A, or that A is a part of our lived experience, the more we try to just do away with it, try to banish it, the more we get caught in this kind of vicious circle of trying hard to get rid of it, yet it gets more strengthened. I'll give you an example. The more we try to get rid of, let's say, depression, and we try to eradicate the depression, sometimes it can be very difficult, because if we're set in this formula of A, not A, then in order to have not A, we have to have A. Because you can't have not A without A. So it's like tying it to that thing. And so we're creating inadvertently a context for the problem. And anything that happens within the context of A, not A, inadvertently feeds A. Now, this can be kind of problematic because a lot of us are trained that the more we need to help people focuses on eradicating, the symptom. And I'm not saying that we shouldn't work to, decrease if that's one of our goals. But for me, a lot of times, real healing, a secret to psychotherapy, therapeutic healing, is not always to eliminate, but to change our relationship. Essentially, what I'm saying is change our relationship to our problem. So, A/not A, we need to blur the distinction, that slash. If that's blurred, then there's a balance there. The person's relationship to the problem has changed. Not that the problem's been eradicated. It's like this. There's pain and there's suffering. I don't know anyone who goes through life without pain. The suffering, a lot of times, is us trying to eliminate the pain. It's not saying that people should live in pain. But when we change our relationship to the thing that we view as the problem, the suffering disappears. And we find that we can live with that pain if we have to. A lot of times we can't solve problems. Some problems are unsolvable because they are a part of life. If we view life in the context of our goal is to solve problems, it's a very difficult life. Some people go through hardships like, health issues, divorce, loss of a job. Sometimes there's no real solving of the problem. It's merely just changing our relationship to the problem. So if we're able to blur that distinction, so there's no slash between A and not A, we see things more as they really are, and it creates a shift, a fluid shift into a different perspective, a different context. Let me give you an example. Several years ago, I had a young lady. She was, if I remember correctly, about 19 or 20 years old. She came for having a lot of depression. And her depression was tied to some aspects of kind of a self-loathing behavior. And one day she pulled up her sleeve and showed me where she had cut so much on one of her arms, a self-injury. But there was so much cutting she had done. I've never seen cutting like this. It's like everything was in a certain pattern, and then when that pattern couldn't be worked, she started cutting at interesting angles. And it almost reminded me of kind of some of the tribal artwork I had looked at in some of my researching on indigenous healing traditions. And at that moment, I realized that we clearly have an A, not A. Depression, self-loathing, not A. And everything we'd been doing really had only continued to feed the depression. So I looked at her arm, and I really noticed how she had this incredible visual spatial ability of how to cut and where to cut and how to place the cut. So as I looked at her arm, I made the comment, it's almost like you're an artist and your body's this canvas. Have you had any desire to do art, be interested in art? And she said, yeah, she'd always been kind of interested in doing graphic arts and those kind of things, but had not really pursued it. So I told her maybe those cuts on her arm, maybe this depression she was going through wasn't whatever we were thinking it was. Maybe this is part of the artist's creative journey. Now, if you read about a lot of great artists, they go through times where they get kind of depressed and don't feel as creative as they could be. And then, they become creative, they find their way and create masterpieces. So I was wondering if maybe there's a part of art within her, part of creation, creativity, that was not able to get out So it had to be turned within. And so I told her, I said, I think the problem here is that you're not creating. You're not going out and doing things that inspire you in this kind of graphic arts and arts world. Now, that moved our conversation away from the depression to following a career as an artist. What does it mean to be an artist? Part of the homework was to go and look up for the next week or two about art schools and graphic arts programs. Which she came back and told me that she'd been so involved with that the cutting has actually decreased. Her depression's still there, but decreased a little. And the more we tended to focus, now this is part of the artist's creative journey. It's not something to eradicate. It's something to kind of move through to get to this part where you can become an artist and live this life of creativity. In time, she was able to start moving toward applying, moving out of town to do it though, but applying for art schools. And she ended up going to a very prestigious art school to pursue graphic arts. And as we ended our time together, her depression was not seen as a depression, a medical problem needing to be eradicated. She was healing. Showing that there was no blur, we were blurring the distinction. There was no distinction between A and not A. What it was is part of this journey. The context had shifted. So rather than trying to eliminate things, we changed her relationship to those things. So she may still wrestle with pain, and we hope that that gets better. But by the time she left, the pain was a part of living and not something to battle, not something to feel as if that there's no hope. It's part of a process leading to something more affirming, more enlightening, more spiritual, however you want to look at it from her perspective. We're taught, and a lot of times therapy gets stuck when we try to eradicate things. Just be thinking when you're working with your clients, how can we change their relationship to their problem rather than merely just try to eradicate the problem? That, for me, is one of the most profound aspects of what we do, because that's healing. Healing is, again, eliminating suffering. It doesn't always mean curing pain. Pain is going to happen. The Buddha said life is suffering, and he said a lot of it's because of how we perceive things. So if we can, get out of this dichotomy of I'm great and I'm not great, and open up to new possibilities, we can move therapy toward a healing interaction rather than a medical model, dichotomous, rigid way of working. I hope this makes some sense. I'm kind of doing it on the fly here for the video, but I think if you just start thinking about your sessions this way, this opens up so much more than what we are generally focusing on. So, hope you enjoy it. Have comments, let me know. Thanks.